Dear learners, I welcome you all to the course Services Marketing. Today, I'm going to give you a summary of the chapter, the gaps model of services quality. It is the second chapter of our syllabus. So I'll be having a discussion on this chapter, especially I'll be focusing on the gaps model of services quality. Let us see you. What do you mean by gap? Gap is basically the difference between these two things. So what do we mean by gap in services marketing or gap model in services marketing? Gap is all about the difference between what the customers are expecting from the company and what is the perception about the performance of the company once they have taken services from that company. So the difference between these two is called gap, or that is the essence of gap model in services marketing. I repeat, this is the difference between what the customers are expecting from a particular service provider, service company, and their perception, the perceptions of the customers about the performance of the company. If you find any difference between these two, that is called gap model, or that is called gap. In other words, I can say it is just a difference between what we seek and what we get. If there's any difference between what we are seeking from the company and what we are getting, we can say there is no gap. If there is a difference between these two, then we can say there is a gap. And that is all about the gap model or the gap in services marketing. You can see difference between customers' expectations and perception. About what? About the services which they're consuming, they're taking from a provider. As I said earlier, as a customer, what we are expecting from the company and what is our perception, what we are getting from the company. If you find any difference between these two, that is called gap. In other words, that is called customer gap. Now the point is why these gaps take place and what are the reasons for which the gap between expectations and the perceptions of customers take place. And we find that there are four major reasons for which gaps can take place. The first one is, you can see the screen. The first one is listening gap, number one. Number two, service design and standards gap. Number two, number three, service performance gap. Number three, and what's the fourth one? The fourth one is communication gap. Just, I'm going to discuss these four ones in brief. Listening gap. If there is a difference between what the customers are expecting from the company, from the service provider, and the understanding of the company about the expectations of the customer. I repeat, what the customers are expecting from the company and what is the perception, what is the understanding of the company about the expectations of the customers. If there is any difference between these two, that is called listening gap. What customers are seeking from me and what I understand, what I know about their expectation from my company. If you find any difference between these two, that is called listening gap. Basically, that is the beginning of the gap. That starts the gap. So there should not be any difference between customer's expectation and the company's understanding about the expectations of the customer. If there is no difference, I can say that there is no gap. So this is the first one, listening gap. Gap two is all about, say, as a marketer, we know what the customers are expecting from the company. And we have a clear understanding about the expectations of the customers. On the basis of that expectation, when we are designing services for our customers, if we fail to design services according to my understanding about the expectations of the customers, then I can say that the second gap takes place. What is that? Service design and standards gap. What is it? If the company fails to design, to arrange or manage the features, accommodate the features of the services based on the understanding of the company about the expectation of the customers. If the company fails, then we can say that the second gap takes place. What is that? The service design and standards gap. Number two, service performance gap. It says as a marketer, as a provider, we know customers' expectation, and based on that expectation, we have designed services, we have designed our service features. But in the third stage, If we fail to perform according to the according to the design we have planned and we have set earlier, then we can say that the third gap takes place. And what is that? Service performance gap. I repeat, service performance gap. It means that if there is any difference between what is our standard, what is our plan, what are our features, and our performance, for any reason, if we fail to perform according to the standard, according to the plan, according to the features we have set for the plan, then we can say that gap can take place. And what is that? That gap, that is service performance gap. And what is the last one? The last one is communication gap. It means that what the company is saying, what the company is preaching to the customers. So the statements the company is communicating with the customers and what they're doing. If there is any difference between what we are saying and what we're doing, then we can say the last gap takes place. And what is that? That is communication gap. So basically, we can say that these are the major areas where gaps can take place. And all these gaps will lead to customer gap. I mean, the gap model in services marketing. So what we have seen? Listening gap, the service design and standards gap, service performance gap, and what is the fourth one? The fourth one is communication gap. Now see why the first gap takes place. I mean, listening gap takes place. Okay, there are some reasons for which listening gap takes place. I repeat, what is listening gap? Listening gap is all about the difference, what the customers are expecting from the company, and what is the understanding of the company about the expectations of the customers. So there are some reasons mentioned here for which listening gap can take place. Inadequate market research orientation. The first one, you see, as a marketer, we don't know all the answers. We don't know what the customers are expecting. To know the expectations of the customers, we'll have to do research on the customers. So if the company is not focusing on relationship, then this gap will take place, because the marketers are not the superman. They don't know anything, everything. So to understand the expectations of the customers, they will have to have they will have to have research on the customers. So this is the first one. If we do sufficient research, if we undertake research sufficiently, there will be no gap. There will be no listening gap. If we don't take researches to understand customers' expectation, there will be a gap. This is number one, lack of upward communication. Upward communication in different levels of communication, say from retailer, wholesaler, agent, company, and ultimately marketing managers and so on. If there is a proper channel of communication in different levels of marketing intermediaries and marketing channel members and so on, then the information which are being collected from the customers, which will be communicated with to the marketing manager, to the management of the company. If there is a proper communication channel in different levels, there will not be any gap. If there is a lack of communication, like in different stages of marketing channel and so on, then there will be a gap, and that will lead to a gap. Insufficient relationship focus, you see the third one. We can say that it means that as a marketer, we have to see to what extent we focus on relationship. As a marketer, if we focus on relationship, we'll be highly concerned about the expectations, about the satisfactions of the customers. So we'll always try to understand the customer's expectation. So if we focus on relationship, we'll be doing a lot of researches, and we'll be very close to the customers. We'll be in touch with the customers, so that we can get all their expectations and all their information from the customers, so there will not be any gap. If we don't focus on relationship, if you're on transaction mode, not on relationship mode, in that case, gap can take place. Insufficient research service recovery, inadequate service recovery, it means if there is any failure in delivering services to the customers, what the measures the company is planning, the company is undertaking to make it up. If we take sufficient measures to recover services, so we can get all the information from the customers about their problems and so on, about the mistakes we have made in delivering services to the customers, in that case, there will be no gap. If we don't focus on service recovery, if we make any mistake in delivering services, we don't acknowledge it, we don't accept it, and we don't try to understand it, and we don't try to make it, in that case, this gap will take place. So these are the major reasons for which listening gap can take place. This is number one, Number two, service design and standards gap. As I said, as a marketer, we have a clear understanding about the expectations of the customers. Fine. Then what is our job? We'll be designing our services. We'll set standard and we'll design features based on which we can perform services for the customers. So service design and standard gap is all about the difference. What is our understanding about the expectation and what is our design? What is our standard? What is our plan about our service? So what are the reasons for which this gap can take place? You see, we have a clear understanding about the expectations of the customers. Fine. But if we fail to design our services accordingly, it means we are designing our services poorly in a poor manner, not as per our understanding and the expectations of the customers. Then this design and standard gap will take place. This is number one. Number two, absence of customer driven standards. If as a marketer we are not customer driven, it means that we are not focusing on the expectations. Absence of customer driven standards, it means that if we are not focusing on customers, if we are customer driven, it means that customer centric. In that case, we'll count each and every single expectation, each and every single desire of the customers. So we'll focus on customers, we'll try to have a clear understanding about the customers, and based on that, we'll design our services. So if it is not, if we are not driven by the customers, in that case, gap will take place. Number two. Number three, inappropriate physical evidence and service gap. It means that if we fail to design proper physical setting in which services will be delivered to the customers, if we have a proper setting where services can be produced and delivered to the customers, and if you can manage, if you can establish a conducive or healthy environment in which services are produced and delivered to the customers, there will not be any gap. In this stage, if we fail to do so, it will lead to this gap. It means service design and standards gap. I repeat, this is all about the difference between the company's understanding about the expectations of the customers and the company's design about the services to meet the expectations of the customers. If there is any difference between these two, then we can say that service design and the standards gap can take place. This is number two. Let's see what is number three, or gap three, service preference gap. Service preference gap is the difference between our standard, our plan, our features that we have set in designing in our services, or the features, the standard, the plan we have set for our services, and the performance. If you find any difference between these two, our plan, our standard, and our performance, then we can say that service preference gap can take place. For any reason, if the company fails to perform services, if the service providers fail to perform services according to the standard they have set, then we can say that service performance gap can take place. Now you see what are the major reasons for which service performance gap can take place. The first one is deficiencies in human resources policies. Number one. Number two, customer who don't fulfill roles. Number two. Number three, failure to match supply and demand. Number three. Number four is problems with service intermediaries. The first one is to deliver right services to our customers according to a plan, according to a standard. First of all, we'll have to recruit some people who are capable of, who have the expertise, who have the knowledge, and can deliver. And they are able to deliver the right services according to our standard, according to our plan, according to our design. If we fail to do so, there'll be a gap. It means that we'll have to have people, providers, who will be able to perform services according to our standard. If we fail to do so, gap will take place. Customers, number two is customers who do not fulfill roles. It means that service is an activity, it is an action, it is an interaction that takes place between the provider and receiver. So both parties have equal involvement in providing or in producing a particular service. If the customers are not fulfilling their due roles, if they are not supportive, they are not cooperative with the providers, it will be quite difficult for the marketeers, for the providers to deliver the right services to the customers. So if the customers play their due role, they are cooperative, they are supportive, then probably there will not be any gap. If customers don't cooperate with their providers, If the customers are not playing their due role, it will be difficult for the marketers, for the providers to deliver their services according to the standard. So that can also lead to this gap. And since service is intangible, we can store it, we can put it in the warehouse. So that is always a challenge to make a balance between supply and demand. Between supply and demand. Just you can take an example. If I'm talking about transportation services in our country, if we see a normal season, a normal time, so on, you're traveling from Dhaka to Rajshahi, Dhaka to Borishal, and so on, you see the transportation services. What is our expectation, and what are the features they're having and they're performing? On the other hand, if you see, if I'm talking about an Eid occasion, during Eid occasion, you see what is our expectation from the transport authority and what they perform and what is their design, what is their standard. So it means that it is quite difficult for the service producer, service marketer to make a balance between supply and demand for the service. So it can cause gap. Which gap? Service performance gap. And the last one is here, problems with service intermediaries. If we are using a lot of marketing intermediaries or marketing channel members to deliver a particular service to the customers, it may cause problems to maintain our standard. Because if we are using a lot of marketing intermediaries, we are losing control over the marketing intermediaries. So to maintain a standard, it might be difficult for the company to maintain the standard if we are having a lot of marketing intermediaries. So more intermediaries we are having, more difficulty probably for the marketer to maintain the performance according to their standard. The lower the number of marketing intermediaries, the easier for the marketer to maintain the standard, the performance according to their standard. So we have found that these are the major areas for which service performance can gap take place. If our human resources policy is not efficient, if customers are not playing their due role, expected role, since it is intangible and it is quite difficult for the marketer to make a balance between supply and demand. And finally, if the marketing intermediaries, channel members are not cooperative, are not supportive, are not maintaining the standard of the company, then it will be difficult for the company, for the marketer to perform services according to that standard. And the last gap is communication gap. You see, communication gap. Communication gap is all about what the company is saying, what the company is communicating about the performance of the company, and what they're doing. What they're saying and what they're doing. If you find any difference between these two, then we can say that communication gap takes place. You see, so what are the major reasons for which communication gap can take place? The first one is lack of integrated service marketing communication. You know, in communication or marketing communication, there is a good number of tools of marketing communication. If we fail to properly integrate all these tools of communication, it will be difficult for the company to perform according to their statement, according to what they have said to the customers. So what are the communication tools? So we can talk about advertising, public relations, direct marketing, and so on. There are so many tools, you know. So we'll have to properly integrate all these tools. If we fail to do so, communication gap will take place. Number two is ineffective management of customer expectation. I repeat, ineffective management of customer expectations. Yes, whenever any customer is purchasing or taking a service from a particular service provider, definitely he or she has an expectation from the company. But what is the expectation of the customers from the company? To a great extent, it is influenced by the company itself. Definitely, there are so many factors which are influencing the expectations of the customers, but the company has a big role in developing the expectations of the customers from a particular company. So if the company fails to manage the right expectation of the customers from the company, then this gap or communication gap can take place. So the companies will have to be so concerned, so judicious in developing, in managing expectations of the customers. It means that the company will have to decide where they want to hold customers' expectation from the company. If they fail to do so, communication gap will take place. Over promising That is, we are exaggerating about the performance of the company. We are saying what we are not actually. So if we are overstating something about our performance and so on, we are over promising, it is just lip service, but we are not like that. We don't mean that. In that case, this gap or communication gap can take place. If we overstate and we are not performing accordingly, so definitely there will be a difference between these two and communication gap will take place. And the last point is what? Inadequate horizontal communication. If you look at a company, marketing is not only the department of a company, there are so many departments. Marketing is one of the departments. So as a marketeer, as a service provider, you'll have to have cooperation and support from rest of the departments. If all the departments, rest of the departments, I can mention finance department, human resource department, so manufacturing department, research and development department, and so on. There's so many departments which make up a company. If the marketing department or service department or service provider is not getting cooperation from all rest of the departments, so it will be quite difficult to perform according to their promise. So we can say that they're the major reasons for which communication gap can take place. Now I can show you the whole model of this service quality. You see the gap. The first gap is, if you, I would like to draw your attention to the screen. You can see in this illustration that you see this is the gap. What the customers are expecting and what the customers are perceiving about the performance of the company. If you find any difference between these two, that says customer gap. What you are seeking, what you are getting, what you are expecting, what you are perceiving about the performance of the company, that means customer gap. Number one, now this gap takes place for four reasons. You see gap one. Gap one is all about what the customers are expecting and what is the perception of the company, what is the understanding of the company, what the expectations of the customers. If there is any difference between these two, that is called gap one. And what is the gap two? Gap two is what is the perception or understanding of the company about the expectations of the customers and what is our service design. If we fail to design our services according to our understanding of the perception, according to our say perception or understanding of the customer's expectation, then we can say that gap two takes place. It means what is we understand, what we perceive, and what we do, what we design, how we design our services. If there is any difference between these two, that means gap two takes place. I mean service design and standard gap. And number three is what do you have designed, what do you have planned, what standard do you have set. If we fail to perform that service delivery, then we can say that gap three, our service performance gap takes place. It means that if there is any difference between our standard and our performance or delivery, we can say that there is a gap. What is that? That is a gap three. And what is number four? What we are communicating with the customers, what we are saying, what we are preaching to the customers, and what is our performance. If there's any difference between what we are saying and what we are doing or what we are performing, then we can say that gap four takes place. So this is all about the gap model. I repeat, gap is all about the difference between customer's expectation and customer's perception about the performance of the company. And this gap takes place due to these four reasons. Gap one, gap two, gap one is listening gap, gap two is service design and standard gap, gap three is service performance gap, and gap four is communication gap. So they're the major reasons for which gap can take place. As a marketer, we are concerned about customer satisfaction, so we'll have to meet the expectations of the customers. If there is any gap in any level, it will never ever be possible for the marketers to satisfy their customers. So we'll have to highly concerned, we'll have to be very judicious and concerned about this gap. We'll be designing all of our marketing strategies and marketing activities in such ways that there is zero gap, there is no gap between the expectations of the customers and their perception about the performance of the company. If you can do so, as a marketer, we are more likely to become successful. And that is all about the summary of this chapter. I hope you will understand. You can have an understanding from my discussion. In addition to that, we have a lot of examples we discussed in the classes. I hope you enjoyed. You attended the classes. If you miss that class from this summary discussion, you can get the understanding. And that is all about. Thank you so much.